Hello, bookworms and literature lovers. Prepare to be transported to a world of magic, intrigue, and breathtaking storytelling as we explore the enchanting realms of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Your support on YouTube means everything to me. If you enjoy my videos, make sure to give them a thumbs up and hit that subscribe follow button. And if you have any thoughts or questions, drop a comment below. I love hearing from you. Pages 143. It is the middle of June. Clarissa Dalloway, a woman living in the Westminster section, London, is enjoying the beautiful weather and thinking about her absent friends. Clarissa notices the people on the streets, the fully blossomed trees and flowers, and observes how certain days are much like a kiss from a wave. The weather makes her feel as young as she did when she was 18 years old, full of life and promise. Clarissa thinks about the fact that the war is over. The king and queen are nestled in the palace. And although there are many things one may be unhappy about, the truth is that the people there loved life. It was the middle of June, so that it was time for garden parties, polo ponies, and dancing all night. Clarissa decides to talk a walk through Westminster as Big Ben chimes the hour. She talks about people she sees along the way, including her old friend Hugh Whitbread. Clarissa talks about how she loves to walk in the city, that it is much better than the country. Hugh is not quite so cheerful as he has brought his ailing mother to see the doctors. Clarissa likes Evelyn Whitbread and thinks of something special to do for the woman during her weekly visit to the nursing home. Clarissa loves Hugh as they have been friends all of their lives. However, Clarissa always feels awkward and underdressed when it comes to the impeccable Hugh. Clarissa thinks about how Hugh hates Peter Walsh and has never forgiven her for liking the man. Clarissa understands. It is obvious that Peter is superior to Hugh, yet Peter delighted one night in ridiculing Hugh, yet beating him out to be a witless mama's boy. Peter could be intolerable, Clarissa knew, but she could not help but adore him. There was no room with Peter, however. As a couple, they had argued all the time. There was no room for debate or Clarissa being right. In the end, Clarissa had to break it off, turn down the marriage proposal. Instead, Clarissa had married Richard Dalloway, a man that did give her room. Peter married an Indian woman while out to sea. Clarissa was deeply wounded and angry. Clarissa thinks about how there had been so many things bred into them all, from tears to endurance and stoical qualities. She thinks about these things and how they are exhibited in Lady Bexborough. Clarissa admires Lady Bexborough more than anyone and wishes to be like her. She would have been like Lady Bexborough, slow and stately, rather large, interested in politics like a man, with a country house, very dignified, very sincere. P9. Clarissa thinks about this as she walks toward Bond Street and the bazaar where she would see Lady Bexborough and a large number of books laid open for perusal. There are no books that would make Evelyn Whitbread happy for even a moment, so Clarissa moves on. Clarissa plans for that night's party, going from shop to shop and thinking about people in her life, from her Uncle William to her daughter Elizabeth, who was not one whit like her mother. Clarissa went to the florist where she was waited on by Miss Pym, a woman that was too eager to please. As Clarissa went about picking out flowers for the party, a chauffeured car pulled up on the opposite side of the street from Mulberry's shop. The car created a great stir, particularly when a hand pulled down a shade to hide the identity of the important passenger. Surely it had to be someone of high rank or importance like the Queen, Prince of Wales, or the Prime Minister. Everyone gawked. Everyone had an opinion. Even after the car had pulled away, people stared and wondered. Septimus Warren Smith and his wife, Lucrezia, observed the sight. People gather around Buckingham Palace. Everyone feels compelled to know who is in the car. Some people want the royals to notice the poverty, the aftermath of the war. Lucrezia tries to distract Septimus from his surroundings. The cause is lost when an airplane begins to write something in the clouds. Everyone tries to guess what will be written. Lucrezia tries to distract Septimus over and over again. Dr. Holmes says nothing is wrong with Septimus, not really, but that Lucrezia must keep him focused on things that are real. Septimus cannot be dissuaded from his observances and pulls into himself while he talks aloud and writes notes on the backs of envelopes. Lucrezia is horrified and tries to get Septimus away from the crowd lest someone see him. Maisie Johnson, a newcomer to London, asks for directions. Lucrezia abruptly tells the woman the way to the tube station and rushes off. Maisie thinks that London is very peculiar. The author continues to give the impressions of various people, including Mrs. Dempster and Meister Bentley. Clarissa arrives home to find her life as she had left it, with Lucy bustling around and the Irish cook, Mrs. Walker, whistling as always. Lady Bruton had asked Richard to attend one of her famous lunch parties. Clarissa had not been invited. Clarissa goes upstairs and thinks about the emptiness of her life. She thinks about falling in love with women. Clarissa remembers her days at Burton and falling in love with Sally Seton. The love was pure and so unlike love with a man. Clarissa had been so sheltered at Bourton and had not realized it until she met Sally. But this question of love, she thought, putting her coat away, this falling in love with women. Take Sally Seton, her relation in the old days with Sally Seton. Had not that, after all, been love? Pie. Clarissa thinks about Sally and their time together while she chooses her attire for that evening's party. Her favorite green dress is torn and must be mended. Clarissa will do it herself, since the maids are already far too busy. Lucy notices the dress and offers to do the mending for her mistress. Clarissa sits with her dress in her lap when there is a knock at the door. Peter Walsh arrives and Clarissa, not having read his letter, is stunned at his appearance. Pages 44-87. Clarissa is so surprised at seeing Peter that for a moment she cannot remember his name. It fades quickly. Clarissa is ashamed that Peter is seeing her mend a dress. Peter's life is so adventurous and exciting, and hers clearly is not. Does Peter wonder what she does every day besides going to parties and mending dresses? Clarissa brings up the days at her father's house. Peter is tormented by remembering those days and wishes Clarissa would stop. How could Clarissa understand the level of Peter's heartbreak? Now Peter will have to tell Clarissa about Daisy, a woman that pales in comparison to his old love. Peter blurts out that he is in love with the wife of a major in the Indian Army. The couple has 2 children, and Peter has returned to London to see about a divorce. Peter worries that he is a failure in Clarissa's eye. Clarissa thinks about everything Peter has done, and how she cannot measure up. She also thinks that it is ridiculous that Peter should be in love at his age. Peter sits on the sofa and cries, not knowing what to do and thinking about the mess on his hands. Clarissa kisses him without thinking about it and then realizes that perhaps she should have married Peter. If I had married him, this gaiety would have been mine all day, PG. Peter is amazed that Clarissa should still have power over him. Just as Peter seizes Clarissa's shoulders and asks if she is happy with Richard, Elizabeth strolls into the room. Despite Clarissa's protestations, Peter leaves. Peter walks from the house thinking about how Clarissa has become hard, how Clarissa had refused him. Peter also thinks about those days in Bourton where he tried to get along with Clarissa's father but found that it was not possible. Peter dreams of being a solitary traveler, having gone beyond the here and now, wondering what it would be like to never go back again. Peter thinks about the days at Burton when he was madly in love with Clarissa. He recalls dinner parties at which Clarissa was the perfect hostess. Peter did not like to share Clarissa's attention, and at times he would sit and talk with Clarissa's maiden, Aunt Helena. Helena took pity on Peter. Clarissa finally came to fetch him. Richard Dalloway had arrived and was introduced around. When Peter met Richard, he immediately knew that Clarissa would marry him. Peter was jealous and angry, although no one had wronged him. Peter was also jealous of the amount of time that Clarissa spent with Sally Seton, the bold, brash, and daring young woman that smoked cigars in her bedroom. It was clear to Peter that Clarissa had fallen for Richard just by the way she blushed when someone mentioned his name. The end had come for Peter and Clarissa. Peter badgered Clarissa until she ended it. Peter was devastated. Life went on. The story switches back to Razia Smith. Razia walks along thinking about Septimus. The Septimus she had married was gone. That man was replaced with a man that said cruel and wicked things, talked to himself and to a dead man. The man had been a friend that died in the war. Razia did not understand it. She only knew that she should not be the one to suffer. Everyone has friends who were killed in the war. Everyone gives up something when they marry. She had given up her home, PG 73, pages 88, 130. Peter continues his stroll in Regent's Park, thinking about Clarissa and how cold she seemed. Clarissa was in love with him. This he knew. But women, he thought, shitting his pocket. Knife don't know what passion is. They don't know the meaning of it to men. AG 89. Peter and Razia both spot an old woman with a deformed hand asking for coppers. Both have seen the woman before and pity her. Razia thinks about the appointment she and Septimus have with Sir William Bradshaw. Razia believes that the man will be able to cure Septimus at once. Razia fetches Septimus and they walk off for the appointment. Along the way, Septimus thinks about the message he carries. So they crossed. Mr. and Mrs. Septimus Warren Smith, and was there after all, anything to draw attention to them, anything to make a passer. By suspect here is a young man who carries in him the greatest message in the world, and is moreover the happiest man in the world, and is moreover the happiest man in the world, and the most PG 92. Septimus thinks about his youth, his love of Shakespeare and Keats. Those things still had appeal for him. He could still think, still reason, and appreciate the beauty of words. However, Septimus could no longer feel. The feelings had died in the war. Septimus had not cared that people died, that Evans was killed. Septimus could feel nothing when Razia cried in despair and loneliness. No matter what Septimus did, there was a sense of unfeeling blankness. When Septimus was young, he wanted nothing more than to write. Writing was not a productive or admirable trait in Stroud. So Septimus left home for London, where he was swallowed up along with thousands of other Smiths. Then there was the war. Septimus had survived. He had excelled and been promoted. Unlike many, Septimus made it home alive. Yet Septimus had lost all feeling. Razia talked about having a baby. She was getting old. Septimus had no feelings about that. He had no passion for Razia. In fact, Septimus had never loved Razia at all. Razia sent for Dr. Holmes, who could not find anything wrong with Septimus. The doctor visited frequently and became alarmed when Septimus talked about death. The doctor came daily and still could not find anything wrong with Septimus. Razia is hopeful about Sir William Bradshaw. The man has a great reputation, all of which he earned through sheer hard work and ability. The fee to see him is quite high, but worth it. Sir William could diagnose an illness in the first 2-3 minutes and seem to be infallible. Sir William speaks to Septimus, and most of the answers are given by Rasia. Sir William is annoyed at Dr. Holmes' recommendation to take bromide. Sir William can plainly see that Septimus has had a complete mental and physical breakdown. Rasia is fretful and desperate. She asks Sir William if Septimus has gone mad. Sir William never spoke of madness. He called it not having a sense of proportion, PG. The threat of suicide is what causes Sir William to tell Rasia that Septimus should go into a home. Septimus is not fit to be out and about as he is a danger to others, but more importantly, to himself. Rasia is devastated. She had gone to Sir William for help, and now things were even worse. Sir William says that proportion is a tricky thing to grasp and control. Hugh Whitbread was invited to Lady Bruton's for lunch, as was Richard Dalloway. Hugh knew that Lady Bruton preferred Dalloway, but the pair had been friends for 20 years and had always delighted in one another's company. Hugh and Richard met on the steps of Lady Bruton's house. Lady Bruton accepted the flowers from Hugh and confessed that she invited only the two men because she needed help. It turns out that the help was nothing more than editing a letter she wishes to send to the Times. So Lady Bruton, organizing an African safari during the war, had been easier. Fortunately, she had Richard and Hugh. Hugh made notes and corrections. Hugh and Richard left and walked down the street together. They stop at a jeweler's where Hugh hopes to buy a Spanish necklace for his wife, Evelyn. Richard never thinks to buy presents for Clarissa. Not trusting his taste in jewelry, Richard decides to buy flowers. Pages 131-174. Richard returns home, flowers in hand. Clarissa is surprised but thrilled at the red and white roses. Those are the only flowers that in her mind should ever be cut. Clarissa did not know the reason for the flowers, but did not know the reason for the flowers, but did not care. She chats with Richard, but does not really hear or understand what he is supposed to be doing at committee that afternoon. It has something to do with the Armenians or Albanians, neither of which held any interest for Clarissa Dalloway. Richard lets the flowers convey his love for Clarissa. There is something that prevents him from saying the words no matter what happens or what she says. Richard tries to make it plain that he is happy and loves Clarissa. He simply cannot say it. Richard brings pillows and a blanket downstairs, insisting that Clarissa rest for a full hour after lunch. The doctor had told Clarissa that once and ever since, Richard has taken it to heart. Richard returns to the House of Commons, and Clarissa proceeds to lie down on the sofa. Clarissa had no real intention of falling asleep, but she did. Miss Kilman and Elizabeth come downstairs from their lesson. Miss Kilman does not want to be in the same room with the likes of Clarissa Dalloway, and is grateful to see that the woman is asleep. Elizabeth has forgotten her gloves and must go back upstairs. Clarissa awakes and speaks to Miss Kilman. No matter what Clarissa says, Miss Kilman takes it as an offense or slight in some way. Miss Kilman loathes Mrs. Dalloway. Clarissa pokes fun at Miss Kilman for talking to herself and for her piety as a born-again Christian. Miss Kilman and Elizabeth go to the stores. They look around, but Miss Kilman will not buy anything. First of all, Miss Kilman is quite poor. Aside from that, nothing she wears is pretty or fits well. She simply looks old and dumpy. No man would ever look at her. Miss Kilman feels even worse when she thinks about Clarissa. She states that she used to envy people like Clarissa Dalloway, but now she just pities them. Miss Kilman's opinion of Clarissa is not good. As a history teacher, Miss Kilman sees great value in education. As a woman that has worked her way up in the world, such laziness as exhibited by Clarissa is repugnant. The woman is spoiled. She has everything she could ever want in a monetary sense. However, when it comes to intelligence, independence, or fulfillment, Clarissa has nothing. Miss Kilman and Elizabeth go to tea. They enjoy themselves to a degree. Elizabeth is eager to leave but waits for Miss Kilman to finish her tea. At the first chance, Elizabeth leaves. Miss Kilman is upset that Elizabeth is gone. Miss Kilman thinks a lot about church and being brought into the light. It happened 2 years and 3 months ago at Mr. Whitaker's church. Miss Kilman struggles with her feelings about Clarissa, inwardly loathing her, and trying to reconcile those feelings to her newfound faith and recommended treatment of peace, not judgment. Miss Kilman walks along the street and ends up at the tower of Westminster Cathedral. There are many people there praying. Mr. Fletcher observes the people and talks to many of them. He sees Miss Kilman praying hard. Mr. Fletcher observes Miss Kilman's clothes and sees her as ragged and disorderly. Mr. Fletcher, looking quite dapper, ignores Miss Kilman. Elizabeth decides to take the omnibus. The weather is beautiful, and Elizabeth sees no reason to go straight home. Instead, she will ride atop the bus and enjoy the wind and the view. Elizabeth thinks a lot about her Chinese heritage and her looks. She thinks about being a pioneer as she walks toward Fleet Street and then toward St. Paul's Cathedral. There is a lot of noise, but Elizabeth revels in it. This is a place that is full of life, but not one that would be patronized by the Dalloways, particularly not at this time of day. Elizabeth worries about the time, determined to ensure that she will not be late for the party that evening. It is good to be out in the open way, from the stores and from Miss Kilman. Miss Kilman always encourages Elizabeth to be who and whatever she can be, as all things are open to women in Elizabeth's generation. Elizabeth knows that Miss Kilman loves her openly and without reservation, a fact which somewhat puzzles Elizabeth. It sometimes makes Elizabeth feel guilty for wanting to get away. After all, Miss Kilman has been more than kind, lending her books, teaching, and encouraging Elizabeth every step of the way. Elizabeth realizes it is time to go home. The clouds have begun to change the look of the day. Septimus is lying on the sofa in the sitting room. He watches the shadows in the room and feels calm. Septimus's heart tells him that there is no reason to fear. He feels as if he is floating. Racia sits and wrings her hands as she watches Septimus. It is not right for a woman to have to watch her husband in this condition as he lay there smiling, hearing and seeing things that only he can see and hear. Racia writes when and what Septimus tells her to write. She wrote it down just as he spoke it. Some things were very beautiful, others sheer nonsense. And he was always stopping in the middle, changing his mind, wanting to add something, hearing something new, listening with his hand up. But she heard nothing. Racia is working on a hat for Mrs. Peters, the married daughter of Mrs. Filmer. Racia thinks the hat is too small. Septimus agrees and thinks it looks like a hat that would be worn by an organ grinder's monkey. Racia does not like Mrs. Peters, but Mrs. Filmer has been kind her them. Septimus and Racia joke about the hat. For a moment, Racia is filled with joy, seeing a fleeting glimpse of the old Septimus. Racia finishes working on the hat and tries it on. She and Septimus have a good laugh. Racia leaves the room to meet the paper girl, happy about the change in Septimus's demeanor. It all changes when Racia is gone. Septimus feels all alone again in a sort of blackness. Racia learns that Mrs. Filmer is not going to see her daughter after all, so all of the hard work was wasted. Racia thinks about the first time she met Septimus. It was in Milan. Racia knew right away that Septimus was English. They were quite different, but Razia was intrigued. Septimus wanted to introduce Razia to the things he loved, including Shakespeare. That was before she could even read a children's story in English. Many of those things were lost on Razia, but she was fascinated by the unusual qualities in Septimus. Septimus was serious and thoughtful, older and experienced. He could help her in ways, and she could return the favor. Septimus thinks about what Sir William had said about being separated. The people we are most fond of are not good for us when we are ill. P. 165, Bradshaw went on to say that Septimus had to be taught how to rest. To do that, Septimus must be separated from Razia. In a moment of lucidity, Razia tries to explain that they must be separated because Septimus spoke of suicide. Razia shows Septimus the things he had written and drawn or had asked her to write or draw. Razia was gentle and said that some were beautiful. Razia collects the papers and puts them into a neat bundle. Razia says she will hide the papers where no one will find them. There is nothing the doctors can do to keep them apart. Dr. Holmes arrives later saying that he has come as a friend. Razia says he cannot see Septimus. Dr. Holmes will not be dissuaded. Holmes sets Razia aside and goes to the bedroom to see Septimus. Septimus hears the doctor coming and thinks that there is only one answer. Septimus does not want to die. Before Holmes can reach him, Septimus throws himself out the window and falls to his death. Holmes tries to keep it from Razia as no one should see that kind of tragedy. Peter walks along the street and notices the sound of the siren that is taking Septimus's body to the hospital. Peter thinks about all of the things that might have happened to the poor person in the ambulance. Peter thinks about his relationship with Clarissa as well as his friendship with Sally Seton. It is odd that some relationships never change despite time and distance apart. Sally had a great deal of impact on Peter even though they hadn't seen each other in many years. Peter was still trying to understand Clarissa's life. Peter thinks that in order to know and understand anyone, one must know and understand the people and circumstances that affect her. For example, the conversation Peter was having with Clarissa was interrupted by Elizabeth, a person that mattered a great deal to Clarissa and therefore solidly impacted Peter even though Elizabeth was not a part of his life. Peter returns to the hotel and receives a stack of letters from the clerk. One of the letters was written by Clarissa. Why must she plague him so? The letter must have been written immediately after he left the house. Clarissa simply said that it was heavenly to see him. Peter is tormented. Pages 175-215. Peter thinks about how things with Clarissa never would have worked out. The relationship never came naturally, not like the one he had with Daisy. Peter always felt like he had to do and say things just right with Clarissa. He always seemed to be criticizing her or trying to decipher her moods and relationships with others. That had not changed in all the time they were apart. In some ways, although he loved her, Clarissa was foreign to Peter. It was not that way with Daisy. With Daisy, everything was easy, without a struggle, even though Daisy was 24 years old and married with 2 children. One of Peter's confidants asked what the consequences would be for Daisy. There were social barriers to be overcome, and if Daisy left her husband, surely she would lose her children. Peter thinks about the people he has met at parties before, like the Morrises. Peter admired the Morrises and regrets that they have moved away. Peter decides that he will attend Clarissa's party and take an opportunity to speak to Richard about what the Conservatives were doing in India. The details of the party are being attended to, and the entire Dalloway house is in an uproar. People have started to arrive. There are many different types of people, including those that are famous either in some celebrity style or because of their position in the government. The Prime Minister will arrive, as will many other important dignitaries. Clarissa is elated. Behind the scenes, things are a well-organized whirlwind. Mrs. Walker has everything under control. Although she does not like having to delegate tasks, as they may not be done her way or live up to her standards, Mrs. Walker knows that the salmon will be underdone, as it always, is nervous enough about it to give the pudding to Jenny. Mrs. Walker simply cannot do it all. Lucy stops in to give updates to Mrs. Walker, including how lovely Elizabeth looks in her gown. There are other helpers at the party, such as Mrs. Parkinson and Mrs. Ellen Barnett, who had been with the family for more than 40 years and came every summer to help with the ladies. There are great, lengthy descriptions of the people and events at the party. Clarissa frets over small details, gushes over her guests, and laments that she hadn't thought of this or that little thing. Peter arrives, and Richard is thrilled to see him. The Prime Minister arrives, and Clarissa shows him around. Lady Bruton also arrives, and although she likes Clarissa, has nothing to say to her at all. Clarissa's Aunt Helena is not dead after all, and has come to the party. In her 80s, the woman is feeble but present. However, she does not remember Peter Walsh. Sally Seton arrives unexpectedly. Clarissa is thrilled to see her. Sally happened to be in town and heard about the party, so she invited herself, hoping to have some time with her old friend. Clarissa knows Sally had married a long time ago, but is surprised to learn that she has 5 boys. There is some sense of vitality Sally once had, but everything else seems to have washed away, as if the woman was wrung out. Sally sits with Peter, and the two talk about the old days. Sir William and Lady Bradshaw arrive. Clarissa asks Lady Bradshaw about their son, who goes to school at Eton. Clarissa always feels hopelessly inept around some of these people. Sir William is talking to Richard about some bill that is in the house. Clarissa overhears something about shell shock, but assumes that it is part of the bill. Later, she would hear how a man who served in the army had just committed suicide. Clarissa is not pleased that Sir William should talk about death at her party. Still, Clarissa thinks of all the fussing she had done that day while a man lay dying on the ground after jumping out of a window. Clarissa and Richard had talked about Sir William. Both liked Lady Bradshaw, but neither liked Sir William. There was something about his smell, Richard had said. There was something about his demeanor, the way he talked, and the airs he put on in front of others. Still, Richard was polite and discussed the bill and the dead man. Clarissa continues to fuss and make sure that everyone is having a good time. Everyone says Clarissa is a perfect hostess. Sally and Peter talk about the old days, the way Clarissa looked, how it was at Bourton, how Hugh had kissed Sally as a type of punishment for saying women should have the right to vote. Sally talks about how she still cannot believe, after all these years, that Clarissa married Richard Dalloway. It was clear, Sally said, that Clarissa loved Peter much more than she loved Richard. Peter is not so sure, but he does know the futility of a relationship with Clarissa. The author continues to observe the behaviors of the people at the party, how each admires one person or another, or chooses to avoid this or that one. Peter thoroughly enjoys spending time with Sally. The adventures of their youth kept them close friends, even though they had not seen one another in years. Peter still could not bring himself to call Sally Lady Rossiter, as if it was some foreign concept. Sally was just Sally. It is getting late. Clarissa notes the hour and hopes that the evening will go on as long as possible. How she loved entertaining and being in the midst of all these famous and notable people. Peter watches Clarissa. No matter what logical arguments Peter could make against it, he still loves Clarissa. And Once again, she was there in front of him.